Thank you for joining us today. My name is Hannah Jennings, and I'm a community organizer here at Tech in Motion. I am so excited to welcome you and kick off our first webinar of 2025. For those of you who have been part of the community for a while now, you know over a decade ago, Tech in Motion was founded by Motion Recruitment, a staffing and recruiting firm. There was a simple mission to bring together the tech community to connect, learn, innovate, and discuss the most pressing IT topics of the day. Today, we're in for an exciting discussion with an incredible panel who will dive into how to make data privacy a core part of your strategy this year. Be sure to stick around until the very end for a live Q&A session. Our panel will do their best to address as many questions as possible, so pop them in the Q&A tab throughout the event. Also, be sure to check out our resource tab on the right side of your screen for details on upcoming events, job search resources, links to some of our speakers' recent work, and more. We're recording today's session, so if you have to hop off early, no worries at all. We'll make sure you get a recording via email. Now, before we hop into today's panel discussion, I'm thrilled to introduce you to our host for today, David Shipley. David is the CEO of Beauceron Security and an award-winning entrepreneur, widely recognized as a global expert in cybersecurity. He's a sought-after speaker, regularly addressing worldwide and appearing in national and regional media to share his insights on cybersecurity. So we are so excited to have you with us here today, David. I will let you take it from here.
Thank you so much. And it's a tremendous opportunity to be here today and to set the stage for this fantastic panel. I'm really excited for this. Privacy and security are two sides of the same coin, digital trust. And that's the currency we all care deeply about in 2025. It's expensive to accrue it, and it's even more so to recover it. I'm excited for today's conversation where we have this fantastic group of panelists and the diverse backgrounds and expertise they bring. Privacy is a fundamental part of all of our individual and collective freedoms. The right to choose when, where, and how to share information about you matters now more than any time before. Now, traditionally, when you've probably watched panels and discussions and videos about privacy and security, there's certainly a lot of the FUD, the fear, the uncertainty, the doubt. I mean, certainly we can look at even how this year has started off with the monumental attack on PowerSchool, a very popular software as a service platform that is dealing with a massive privacy breach that affects thousands of school districts and potentially millions of students and teachers. But there is far more to this issue than the FUD. There is a tremendous opportunity to build privacy and security by design into our organizations, which will not only enable resilience, but also improve competitiveness and productivity, which will enable adoption of technologies like artificial intelligence. Now, in my work, I focus on how we can get people to be in control of the technology they use. And I focused on how we motivate people to make good choices about technology so they can reduce their cyber risk and thrive in a digital world. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion, and remember, participate so that you can get the most value, and this can help you make good choices. With that in mind, I'd like to welcome our panelists.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cristina Bartolacci. I'm the head of sales engineering at Thoropass. I've been with Thoropass for about almost 5 years now. So I have joined the pre-sale side of the process, but formerly sat as a consultant, assisting clients through implementing compliance and security programs of all different sizes, from SMB businesses to enterprise and Fortune 500s. And prior to joining Thoropass and sitting on this side of the project, I actually used to be an auditor. So I was an IT SOX, IT risk auditor. And that's where I kind of got the background and the foundation for my knowledge and my interest in the privacy and security space specifically. So really excited to be here today. Thank you, David, for the intro, and looking forward to today's awesome discussion.
Awesome. I love your journey. It is absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure you bring a wealth of well-earned experience to the table for your clients and for us today. So thank you so much. And maybe Gavin, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So Gavin Grounds, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mercury Risk and Compliance. Mercury is about 2 years old. It'll be our birthday next month. And we focus on pretty much cross-industry, multiple industries and internationally on building out risk management across various domains related to technology. So technology risk, cyber risk, AI-related risk. And of course, with that, then there's a lot of focus on privacy. Prior to forming Mercury, I was at Meta. I ran the security risk and compliance function at Meta across the Meta products. Prior to that, I was the leader of the cybersecurity strategy at Verizon, and also built out their GRC and particular focus on risk management at Verizon. Prior to that, I cut my teeth at Hewlett-Packard in the enterprise services, the outsourcing business. So I was the delivery CISO, basically taking care of security risk and compliance, including privacy, across about 4,000 clients in about 60 different countries. So I'm excited to be here with the rest of the panel today. One thing, by the way, that Cristina didn't mention is that I think she ran the New York City Marathon this last time, so she didn't mention what she does in her private time. I also do distance running, and so that we have that in common. Also, I do a lot of work focused on support for suicide prevention initiatives for child safety and protection, and also for anti-human trafficking.
That's awesome. Thank you for all of that work. And Gavin, thank you for the experience you bring, particularly from the teleco sector, which, as we all know, is never attacked by anybody, anytime. No, it's a hairy place to be. Almost as bad as higher education back in the day. I'm kidding. Jermaine.
Hey, very excited to be here today with this great panel. Jermaine Oldham, I'm the Vice President of Tech Ops and Information Security at Echo Global Logistics. So in my role at Echo, I'm responsible for infrastructure operations as well as securing our assets, data, and platforms. So I've been with the organization for almost a year, about 9 months, the fast and the furious, making sure that we're moving forward with a multitude of different strategies to support our business, but yet keeping us secure. I've been in the tech industry in multiple companies and roles and industries for about 27 years. I'm aging myself. So started my career back when I joined the military, the U.S. Air Force, back in the day. And I spent 5 years in San Antonio, Texas, and then 3 years in Belgium, supported NATO. After the military, I joined a company called Temper Seal International, in infrastructure and security capacity, where I spent 11 years supporting the business to drive business goals and objectives. From there, I moved on to a company called Peak 10. They're now called Flexential, where I was the regional CIO and senior director responsible for the Charlotte market. I had about 400 customers that I supported across security, operations, engineering, providing IT services. And then after that, I moved to Northwest Arkansas, where I'm currently at right now, working for a company called JB Hunt Transport. Was with them in a multitude of different IT leadership roles for 6 years. And then prior to Echo, I worked for a company called Outdoor Cap Company, where I was the CIO. I came in as a CIO and quickly became the CISO as well, because they needed a security strategy and a program built, and I did that. It was a great learning experience for me to really build something from scratch and really create some sustainability for the business going forward. So I'm really happy to be here today. Looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear your perspective on things, and thank you for your service as well. Of course, as an Army guy in the Canadian Army, we always have a friendly rivalry between those of us who play in the dirt and those who get to be in the sky. And you could tell that Jermaine chose better in life than I did. But we'll go from there. Well, let's move on to our first topic for discussion. And we're going to talk about integrating data privacy into strategy. And, one of the interesting questions that a lot of people have is, what role should leadership play in establishing a company-wide data privacy-first culture? And maybe, Jermaine, I'll start off with you.
Yeah, great. That's a great question. So, leadership plays a critical role in establishing a company-wide data privacy first culture. And some of the key ways that leadership can falter this culture are including the following. So, one, setting a tone. Leaders should communicate the importance of data privacy as a core value by setting a strong example, prioritizing data privacy in all business discussions and decisions, because that will signal the significance of the entire organization. The second thing is developing and endorsing policies. Leadership should be actively involved in the development and the endorsement of comprehensive data privacy policies. Their commitment to these policies help ensure that they're taken seriously throughout the organization. Three, allocating resources. Leaders need to allocate adequate resources, including budget, tools, and personnel, to support data privacy initiatives. And this includes investing in the necessary technology and training programs. Four, fostering a culture of accountability. So leadership should establish clear accountability and responsibilities for data privacy at all levels, encouraging a culture where employees feel responsible for not only protecting data, but understanding the consequences of not doing so. And then promoting education and awareness. Leaders should champion ongoing training and awareness programs to ensure all employees understand data privacy risks and responsibilities, including regular updating training in response to new threats and regulations. And then I've got two more nuggets for you. Incorporating privacy into business strategy. Leaders should embed data privacy into the overall business strategy rather than treating it as a separate initiative or concern. This means considering privacy implications in every aspect of planning and development. And then finally, monitoring performance. Leaders should oversee regular audits and assessments to ensure compliance with data privacy laws and internal policies. They should hold departments accountable for privacy-related performance metrics. So by actively participating and demonstrating a genuine commitment to data privacy, leaders can inspire an organization-wide focus on protecting personal and sensitive information, thereby cultivating a robust data privacy first culture.
That's awesome. If I can ask you a quick follow-up question, of the things that you suggested, which one do you think leaders struggle with the most?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, when it comes to leaders and what they struggle with the most, one of the challenges I've had and other leaders I've seen have is really incorporating privacy into business strategy. When you think about, the business is running fast, they are moving along with their initiatives, and sometimes it's hard to retrospectively or in the moment think about data privacy. So I think that's one of the big struggles is that as the businesses are developing their business strategy, think about data privacy and all the core components and elements of that to ensure that as the business is running to support their internal employees and customers, that data privacy is at the forefront.
Thank you so much. And now I'm going to turn to Cristina, and I'm going to ask Cristina, how have developments in generative AI? I mean, it's been an interesting week in generative AI, but how have developments in generative AI privacy policies last year in 2024 influenced the data privacy landscape for businesses?
Yeah, it's something that, we talk a lot about it in the industry because, AI certainly is not new per se, right? There's obviously been a lot that's occurred in the past couple of years that has projected it forward infinitely to a point where if you're not using AI, you're actually behind the ball. But I think one of the big things is that in the last year, in 2024, and I think we're going to see a really big emphasis on this also in 2025, is how we're actually integrating and using AI, and the ethical use of that and the implementation of it is going to have a big emphasis. For a really long time, it's not new to Europe, for example, with the implementation of GDPR, and even in the United States with states like California implementing their own version with CCPA. And we're starting to see additional states individually start to adopt it as well. But we're going to see a bigger emphasis on actually providing the transparency and the consent associated with the use of AI. It's something that everybody has a right to actually understand what data is being consumed by technology that they're using every single day. And I think it's something that, especially in 2024, 2020, I mean, especially 2023, but 2024, we got a little bit better. In 2025, I think is really going to be, there's going to be a heavy push on it, is actually really informing buyers of how a model is actually being trained, what information is being used to train the model. And, you know, one of the big emphases that I always, you know, like to educate people on is like, if you can't explain this to somebody who isn't in the AI space in a way that is transparent and easy to digest, and actually for them to be able to, at the end of the day, understand what they're doing rather than just consenting to the cookies, accepting all just to be able to move on. You know what I mean? It's like that everybody has a right to that. And I do see that 2025 will have a greater emphasis on policies that will be acceptable and digestible for a broader audience.
And just a quick follow-up to that, with all the news this week about, Deep Sense and of course, you know, the rocketing of popularity. So this is not likely to be the #1 app that businesses are running to this week, but their employees sure might be.
Yeah,
so how important is for them to have a policy on like when, where, how to use AI tools to do your job?
Absolutely. And I think we started to see that even last year when, you know, ChatGPT started to really kind of come on the scene in a more heavy way. The same thing is going to continue to happen. You have to have a firm stance as a company. You have to have a policy that's widely accepted. I mean, Jermaine talked about it earlier, but in order to get company buy-in, it's leadership top down from a governance perspective. You need to have an opinion on the ethical use and consumption of AI, and, you know, to have a policy that is outwardly placed for employees to understand that, yeah, maybe it's you're going to use it to enhance your job experience, or, you know, certain to get rid of mundane tasks and alleviate some of the burden related to that. But it shouldn't be replacing human elements or work, and it shouldn't be, you know, providing bias that could be potentially harmful or altering the way that, you know, the service or the product that you're delivering to your clients has been, you know, interfered with in any way.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks for the chance to dive a little bit deeper. Gavin, I'm going to turn to you now. And of course, you know, Cristina alluded to this. This is starting to get more and more expensive. Jurisdictions at the state level are coming out with more and more comprehensive regulation in absence of national. We've got more and more companies competing on the global stage. So can institutions offload privacy compliance burdens by outsourcing this? Can I just transfer this problem to somebody else and they can manage all these issues of consent and identity management? Or is it better to maintain in-house control?
It's a really good question. And I think whether we're talking about privacy or any other obligation, basically, we have to be compliant with law. I think in the US, there's still only 17 states, for example, that have actually passed privacy law. So all the other states, it's really kind of, well, we might have an internal law, if you like, you know, what our corporate position is on privacy. But any of those obligations that we must meet as an organization or as an institution, what we cannot outsource is our accountability. So, you know, it's incumbent on us that if we are under a particular law that we have to comply with, that there's certain citations that we must comply with. And this applies not just to privacy, it's anything that's regulated or anything where there are policies and standards that we need to meet. We cannot outsource the accountability. What we can do, though, is we can break it down into specific functions where it might be more operationally efficient and even financially efficient to have a third party do those. So you mentioned, David, as an example, like on identity management. So if we were to ask the question, well, could we outsource the identity management to help ease the burden on our operations, if you like, whether that's a financial burden or operational burden? What we need to do is break that function down into its various sub functions. So, for example, when it comes to provisioning or deprovisioning, I think even without privacy regulations, we're probably all seeing the situation where, especially in a large organization, hey, should Joanne Smith still have access to this app, or should Joe Blogg still have access to this app? And if that's all centralized, then the decision is, yeah, they all look like they're still employees. 650 people just get re-provisioned, and probably only 300 of them needed. So with that particular function, obviously the recommendation would be to have that closer to where the business operations actually are, so that people really know that, yeah, Gavin still is in this role and he still does need that particular access. Whereas perhaps the maintenance of the actual platform itself, the provisioning platform, and again, not just with identity management, just using that as an example, we can look at the actual function, say, could we get more efficiency by outsourcing this particular management of the platform, or these particular processes, could we outsource those? And just kind of following up on the questions to Cristina, could we use AI to enhance the performance of some of those processes? So I think if kind of to wrap that up, we cannot outsource our accountability. But what we can do is take specific functions and see how we can drive efficiency in the way we operate those sub-functions.
No, I really appreciate that. I mean, can you think of an example of companies that may have like gone the wrong path on this? But like, okay, well, it's somebody else's problem and it kind of blew up on them?
Well, it does. I don't want to mention any companies by name, so I'll keep it even out of the tech world. But you remember there was a certain motor manufacturer years ago, and they decided that they wanted to use a particular brand of tire on their car, like the stock as it comes out of the factory. And there was a major problem with that tire company. So even though the manufacturer of the car said, well, that's not us, it's the tire manufacturer, I didn't, as the consumer, I didn't choose that tire manufacturer. I bought my car from that car company. So ultimately the accountability, the primary accountability, laid with them. Now, they might have gone after the tire company as well and said, hey, you let us down, but nonetheless, the primary accountability did not get transferred, if you like, to that other company. So that's just one example. But unfortunately, there are probably thousands of examples like that where there's an assumption, and especially in risk management, I hear a lot of people say, oh, we can transfer the risk. Yeah. And in reality, if your risk is ultimately related to your accountability and your ultimate liability, then you can't transfer that. Trying to get insurance coverage on something is not transferring the risk. You're just trying to minimize the financial damage that you might incur. But the accountability, the risk, you will always own.
No, I thank you for helping clarify that. It was a great example, also stepping back from the tech world. But ultimately, you know, it's the relationship, the brand that I have is that I expected you to take care of this, and no matter that, you're going to have to make that right. So thank you for that clarification. And let's move on to everyone's favorite next sort of area, which is global compliance and risk mitigation. And of course, you know, as Cristina alluded to, these laws, particularly GDPR, CCPA, in Canada, Quebec has passed laws with these similar onerous penalties, you know, millions of dollars or percentage of global turnover or top revenue. So these things are no joke. But I guess starting off, Cristina, maybe with you, what are the key challenges organizations continue to face when navigating these global privacy regulations, whether it's GDPR, CCPA, et cetera?
Yeah, I think that, you know, one of the things that I was talking about earlier, and it has kind of been a common theme is, you know, and even the four of us had discussed this previously, but a little bit, the goalpost has been continued to move a little bit, right? So understanding what the baseline is, what is going to be coming forward, you know, what you need to adhere to. So that's been really difficult for companies to be able to actually necessarily meet specific criteria. Now, you know, GDPR, like I mentioned, has already been in place for a really long time, and CCPA as well. But, you know, even as Gavin was just mentioning, there's been individual state by states that have been popping up additional requirements and things like that. So, you know, you have to have a really, if you're a company, you really need to have a solid understanding of what's in front of you from a compliance and risk management and, you know, just a regulatory requirement, which I do think just from a holistic risk management perspective, like regulatory requirements will always be on my proverbial risk register, because it's just they're constantly changing. They could change every single day. You could read something every single day from somewhere in the world, and there would be a different change, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to keep up. And as you think about like privacy and AI, that's even more true, to be honest. So I think one of the biggest things and the biggest challenges that companies are facing is what the correct way or how to stay on top of all of these changes constantly. That's always a little bit of a rat race. And then I do think at the end of the day then as well, even if you're assigning that task to a specific GRC manager or to a risk professional or a security analyst, that's fabulous. That's wonderful. I love that that's a key metric. How is management assisting you in getting that as a, a broader management buy-in, goal? It needs to be a key objective at the highest level, that this is a priority that needs to come from the top down and kind of disseminate across the organization, which, whether you're a company, I've seen it firsthand, whether you're a company of 20 people or a company of 20,000, that's always going to be a challenge, obviously in different magnitudes, but that buy-in and getting that buy-in from everyone, I think, is always going to be a challenge. So, yeah, I would say that's one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, I can't help but feel it, and I've seen this before, where the senior executive learns about a regulatory requirement as they're figuring out how they're going to notify various officials about a privacy breach. And I would suggest that's probably the worst time to learn about your regulatory requirements.
100%. And, it gets even worse when you start to, if you, God forbid, have a breach, or if you're in violation, and then, we've talked about the economic impact, but if you get a fine, for example, that you don't know, they're not small fines. I mean, we see them all over. GDPR is definitely one of the ones that I would say cracks down the most. And you can just do a quick Google search for what those fine sizes look like. And, they're potentially catastrophic for organizations. So not abiding by it is not an option, but staying on top of it is not simple. How do you find a happy medium for everyone?
Well, that sets us up well, I think, for the next question. And Jermaine, I'm going to pick on you, I guess, for this one, which is what tools or frameworks are essential for helping with that continuous compliance, and also the treadmill of evolving data privacy laws and continuous compliance?
Yeah, this is a great question. And to kind of go along with Cristina, and how do we enable it with tools as well as frameworks? Maintaining continuous compliance with the evolving data privacy laws requires a combination of tools and frameworks designed to help organizations manage data effectively, assess risks, ensure adherence to legal requirements. So when I think about tools, what top of mind for me is data mapping software. So tools like OneTrust or TrustArt can help organizations map their data flows, identify what data has been collected, how it's been used, where it's stored, and what's crucial for compliance. When I think about privacy management platforms, comprehensive solutions like OneTrust, as an example, can provide functionalities for managing privacy policies, conducting assessments, and maintaining records of processing activities. Risk assessment tools. When I think about risk assessment tools, such as RSA Archer or Logic Manager, they help organizations conduct privacy impact assessments and risk assessments to identify and mitigate risk. Incident response tools are important as well. So incident management software like PagerDuty or ServiceNow, which we use here at Echo, can assist organizations in managing data breaches and privacy incidents, ensuring compliance and incident notification requirements. Can't forget about training and awareness platforms. So online training and awareness solutions such as KnowBe4 or SANS can provide data privacy training for employees, ensuring they understand their responsibilities and the importance of compliance. And then the last tool that I'll mention is data loss prevention. So tools like McAfee DLP or Symantec can help monitor and protect sensitive data from unauthorized access or breaches. So frameworks, we've already kind of talked a lot about frameworks here and it comes up, but I'll just double down on a few of those. GDPR compliance. So this provides a structured approach to meet requirements of GDPR regulation, including principles of transparency, data minimization, and user rights. We haven't mentioned this one, but this is very important, this cybersecurity framework. So this framework provides guidance on identifying, protecting, detecting, responding to, and recovering from data privacy incidents. ISEC 27001. This is an international standard that outlines best practices for information security management systems and helps organizations establish and maintain data protection protocols. COBIT framework is another one. This framework helps organizations manage and govern their IT and data privacy processes effectively. And then the last one I'll mention that we've already kind of talked about, CCPA, compliance guidelines. So this guideline adopts specific guidelines and frameworks tailored to the California Consumer Privacy Act to ensure compliance with state-specific data privacy laws. So by implementing these tools and frameworks, organizations can better navigate the complexities of data privacy laws, ensuring continuous compliance while effectively managing data risk.
It's awesome. Thank you so much. I mean, sooner or later, I'm going to have to convince you to add Beauceron to the list on the security awareness and training side to grow that global rep. But what I want to pull out for a second is, of all the frameworks you mentioned, which is the one you love the most and which is the one you hate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start with the one I love the most. I love NIST cybersecurity framework. In my role, we've developed kind of a defense in depth strategy where we're all about identifying, protecting, detecting, responding to, and recovering from cyber threats and privacy threats. And I love the framework because it maps out, it allows you to really map out where you are from a maturity perspective, and allows you to plug in to say, okay, where are we at and where do we need the most help and where we need the most focus areas. I would say the least one, and it's not that I have anything against this one, but GDPR compliance. This is deep and wide and complex, and there's a lot of interpretation with this that you have to do. And then, as to Cristina's point, if you breach, there's a lot in fines or penalty if you don't meet the requirements there. So that's my favorite and my least of those frameworks.
Appreciate the love for the NIST CSF. Gavin, how can businesses harness AI, foundational AI models, while reducing the potential of leaking proprietary or sensitive information? I mean, perhaps not using the one that just came out from China, but I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, yeah, I won't mention any brands or any specific events. I think the most critical to me, and I think most people are kind of observing, is the AI tools themselves, whether it's Gen AI or whatever kind of AI tool we're using. They're always going to kind of play leapfrog over each other from a functionality perspective, from a performance perspective. And a lot of companies, especially in cyber, are actually using AI already and don't know that they are. Right. So as an example, some of the vulnerability management tools that some of the participants, the audience might be actually using, some of those tools are actually already using AI. And so really what I like to kind of really focus on is what is the learning model of whatever application of AI that we're using. So as an example, we talked a lot about regulations, and Jermaine, you just mentioned about different frameworks. So let's say you've got an organization that is US based, and perhaps from a maturity perspective, they want to use NIST CSF as a kind of benchmark to measure against how well are we doing in this subcategory and so on and so forth. Why? Because maybe they want to report that to the board. However, if they have contracts, for example, with customers in Europe, they might be obliged contractually and therefore legally obliged to meet ISO 27000 series requirements. And then they might also need to meet GDPR, and they may also need to meet the 17 states that have passed privacy laws in the US. And as we've all talked about, that kind of that's an ever-changing field. So I know there are tools that are available using AI, for example, that within minutes will take all of those frameworks and or regulations that you are required to comply with or you desire to comply with, and will quickly map them. Now, I mentioned earlier about when I was running security risk and compliance for the outsourcing business at HP, which eventually became DXC, with so many different countries and so many different companies that were clients of ours in so many different highly regulated industries, including government and military, we had monumental tasks to keep all of that mapping in place. Whereas now that tool that I was alluding to, it does that in minutes. Now that's said about the learning model, the large language model. Of course, all of those regulations, all of those citations, all of those frameworks are public domain. So if you've got a language model, it's just AI is pulling all that together and snappy, kind of doing the map, and so you can see, hey, you meet this one, you're going to meet all these other citations as well. Now, the next question is, well, what's the language model that I'm using in my company, right? So if I was to literally have, what we have to realize is when we're using AI and whatever language model it's actually using, it will learn not only new pieces of information, it will draw conclusions. I think we've all had the experience where we're on a social media site and an advertisement comes up, and if we spend too much time watching that mini reel, then all of a sudden we start seeing adverts and popping up for different products. Like, how did that person know that I was interested in the new toaster? Because it's learning and drawing conclusions and inferring from that. So let's say if 25 people from Mercury suddenly started hitting a public AI tool like a XGPT or whatever, and asking, hey, what are the requirements for X, Y, and Z for this kind of business in this country? It will learn, hey, 25 people from Mercury just asked this similar question. And so that's the kind of thing when we say, what our eyes should be on is what is the learning model. And back to the question is, because that's how we're protecting our IP. So let's say if we're about to, maybe we're about to open up in a new market, or a new industry or a new geography. We want to be judicious about which AI tools we are going to use, and in particular, where is it a private large language model, or is it public? And if it learns from my questions, is it going to disseminate that into a larger language model where it's learning from 1,000 companies? So it's really truly down to understanding what the learning model is for the large language models and making sure that where it needs to be public, and that's the best result we're going to get, like that mapping exercise, perfect. But we have to be judicious about what it's going to learn about our IP, our strategy as a business, or our personal privacy data.
No, that's awesome. And it reminds me, one of my favorite sort of data privacy stories was how stock market investors were tracking Tesla output, gathering data from smartphones that had certain weather apps installed on them, and they could literally tell there were more people working on the factory floor. And what I love what you just alluded to is that, these folks making available via their services free, in which case your data is now the exchange, the currency. These will be analyzed by data brokers and data miners and others to understand trends and insights and to divine where things are headed. So she made a really interesting distinction between private LLMs and public ones. Can I just pull a little bit further? Like, what do you mean by private? Do you mean I host it myself, or is it Microsoft, but we have a better contractual arrangement? Can I just pull a little bit on that thread?
Yeah, so there are language models out there, and again, I won't name any specific brands, but ones that are kind of really already well educated, if you like. And it is possible to pull those down into your own private implementation. And it doesn't matter what platform you're on. You could be an AWS shop, you could be an Azure, you could be a Google Cloud shop, doesn't matter. But once you've pulled it down, it's now only learning from your environment. And it's only learning from your people. Now, it does mean that what it has learned on the outside is kind of a little bit stale. So you have to have like a refresh cycle. But once you do that private implementation of an LLM, it is private, and you get to control that it's only going to learn now going forward from your environment. And there are commercial products that are starting to emerge that do just that. There are some other big ones. You mentioned some big brand names that say, "Oh yeah, you can buy a laptop now, and our AI is completely embedded into your OS." And the promise that they make is, but the privacy and security is kind of built around how your account is structured. I'm sure the federal government of the United States really appreciated that when they had an incident that kind of let their data would go places where it shouldn't have gone. So again, we just have to be really judicious about. But to answer your question, yes, we can get a private language, large language model, and there are commercially available tools to do exactly that. Then the challenge becomes refreshing what it would have learned if it was public.
Thank you so much. In interesting contrast, that's the challenge in that, which moves into our third section about building and maintaining consumer trust. And Cristina, maybe I'll turn to you for this one. But in the event of that really bad day, how can they rebuild customer trust in the event of a data breach or privacy incident? What are the best practices?
Yeah. I actually want to take it back to the very beginning of this webinar and to something Gavin said, which is accountability. Accountability is one of the biggest things that I think it's the first step, right? It has to be the first step. You have to take responsibility and ownership for what happened, to be accountable for the fact that, at the end of the day, for whatever reason, it did happen. It's not their fault, somebody else's fault, another company's fault. I think that's one of the biggest things, that when you see a large corporation that has a breach, the quickest thing that they do is actually blame some other system failure. And it's a finger pointing game. I think that actually does so much more harm than good, because even if it was the responsibility of somebody else, like for an organization to say, you know what, I messed up, let's take the first step forward. We as humans, or we as machines, need to all just learn to do that. So I think that's probably one of the first areas in terms of building trust back up, personally or professionally. That's the best way to do it. And then, you have to start from there. The rebuilding phase. I think you need to be showing actionable steps that are taken in quantifiable ways to showcase that you are taking measures against this, right? So it may honestly be as rudimentary as redefining, reworking your privacy policy, your information security policy, having a publicly available trust center, for example, can also assist in something like this. Having a place where companies can feel confident actually working with you again, to know that what happened before isn't going to happen again. And then, at that point, you kind of cross, you go basic, you go leveled up, and then kind of the grand finale is you have to truly identify at the end of the day, there was a hole, you were lacking some type of technology or human error or whatever it may be occurred. You got to stop, seal that gap, and you got to level up in that space. Typically, it's never one person or one system's failure. It's a perfect storm that causes a catastrophic situation. So having those vulnerability scanning, I know there was a question in the chat about, for example, a pen testing strategy and making sure that, you're running different offensive security in that way, is all very, very important, and something that I think at the end of the day showcases and builds the true technical trust outside of the reputational damage that occurs. And then you can move forward, you don't need to dwell on it.
No, it's interesting. The point that you make is so important. Is accountability helps rebuild trust. You own it. This is what happened. This is how we fix it, etc. I think CrowdStrike did a great job. It wasn't a privacy or data incident. It was a resiliency issue. Yep. And they owned it and came right up front. And all their metrics, business performance metrics, have validated that taking ownership stance.
100%. Yeah. And I think that's why you don't think, there's of course jokes and memes and whatever you want to call it on the internet about what happened with CrowdStrike, but there's not the same type of reputational damage as, for example, a casino hack or some of the big healthcare companies that kind of get it. Those are pretty staining reputational damages that people have a really hard time moving forward with it. And it's, I commend CrowdStrike especially for the type of company that they are too, taking that accountability. Had they taken a different direction, I mean, if you're a technology company and you're not taking the accountability route and you're placing blame, especially, it's a double whammy. So
no, thank you for that. Now on the front end of things, before the bad day happens, what steps can businesses take to improve transparency in how they collect, use, and protect consumer data? And Jermaine, I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have some thoughts. This is a great conversation, by the way. And when I think about CrowdStrike, going back to what you and Cristina were talking about, when I was at Outdoor Cap, I was a CrowdStrike customer. And when I moved on to Echo, where I'm at today, we're not a CrowdStrike customer. So I immediately, when that all went down, I texted my primary security engineer at my old company and then texted the CEO, my former boss, and said, "Hey, are you all okay?" And she said, "Yeah, we got a game plan. This is what the team is doing." So it was good to see that, and good to see that CrowdStrike really stepped up and took accountability. So to answer your question, so improving transparency and how businesses collect, use, and protect consumer data involves a series of strategic steps designed to enhance communication and build trust with customers. So one opportunity is creating clear privacy policies. So creating easily accessible, clear, and comprehensive privacy policies that outline what data is collected, how it's used, who it's shared with, and the measures taken to protect it. And the key there is using plain language and avoiding complex legal jargon to ensure understanding. User consent forms. So implementing straightforward consent forms that explain the purpose of data collection to give consumers control over what data they share. And considering using a layered consent techniques where users can choose specific types of data they're comfortable sharing. Providing regular updates. So keeping consumers informed about any changes to data collection and usage practices, updating privacy policies promptly, and notifying users through emails or on the company website that things are changing. Can't forget about data access and deletion rights. So providing consumers with the ability to access their data and understand what information the company holds about them. And then allowing the users and consumers to easily request deletion of their data and clearly communicating the process for doing so. Educating consumers. Offering educational resources such as blog posts or FAQs about data privacy rights and practices. And this can essentially empower consumers to make informed decisions about their data privacy. Two more tidbits. Utilizing data protection technologies. So implementing robust data protection measures such as encryption and access controls, and clearly communicating these practices to the consumers, because transparency about security measures can bolster consumer confidence. And finally, and certainly not leastly, and I think Cristina mentioned this, third-party vendor accountability and overall accountability. So being transparent about data sharing with third-party vendors, disclosing whose vendors are and what data they're handling to reinforce accountability throughout the entire supply chain.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And the last question in this section, before we get to some of the audience questions, and there are some doozies in there. And I'm conscious, Cristina, I know that you're getting tight for time, so I want to include you in the gang. So Gavin, I'm going to time constrain you a little bit, but is AI, and if it is, how is it influencing consumer trust? And what should we think about that?
So I think it is absolutely influencing consumer trust, but not in the way that we in the cybersecurity community might think about it. So if you think about, well, and I will mention some brands, right? So like ChatGPT, if you think about this, the speed at which that was adopted and started to be used by consumers in particular, it was like snippy, snippy, snippy. The co-founder of Mercury, her father is beyond retirement age. And he's like all over ChatGPT, and he's showing his wife how to use it and everything else. So there's an implicit trust, I think, for the most part, that people just assume that their privacy is being taken care of, that the cybersecurity is being taken care of. I mean, I think one of the oldest applications that always comes to my mind for artificial intelligence is an autopilot. So, I'm actually relieved when I'm flying in a jet across, commercial jet, by the way, guys, commercial jet across the Atlantic. I'm relieved to know that the autopilot's working well. So there's less risk of pilot fatigue, for example, with these thousands and thousands of decisions that have to be made during that flight. And we've all come to accept that autopilot, that's a form of AI. It is an AI application. So I think there's just an inherent trust. And therefore, I think how that impacts us commercially as a cybersecurity community and any business is, with or without regulation, we're almost morally obliged to manage that privacy, to earn that trust that has been just handed to us with very few questions asked.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to some of the audience questions, and I'm going to pick and choose a few that have some of the votes. But this is a very interesting one, and I'll round robin this. Whoever wants to jump in. How are companies preparing for the threat of adversaries storing encrypted data today, a strategy known as harvest now, decrypt later, in anticipation of using quantum computers in the future that can break current encryption algorithms? And I'll be honest, I'm frightened. They're going to throw it there and say that quantum and the breaking of current encryption is kind of Y2K without an actual date, so companies don't. But maybe I'm wrong. Cristina?
Yeah, I might actually round robin this one probably more to Gavin. I feel like this might closely align to yours. I mean, I think that, this is one of the same type of challenges that we're kind of talking about, the fact that I'll leave it to Gavin, probably maybe for Jermaine as well, if you want to weigh in. But just from my point of view, I feel like it's one of the topics and it's one of the items that that companies are evaluating this as they come. They definitely need to have a clear stance on what they actually plan on doing for this. I mean, the same kind of point that David said, I'm not sure that like everybody necessarily actually understands the implications of what that means and the whole transparency and actual digestibility of what the policy and what that would mean as a consumer and the services that you're actually providing to your users, and translating that is definitely important. We're obviously a group of professionals in this space, so we have a greater understanding of what that could entail. But I think always taking a step back and thinking of like, would my grandmother know what that means, for example, and how can I explain that to her, is always kind of the approach that I take. But Gavin, Jermaine, we'll leave you to add some additional comments.
Yeah, sure. I think it's really interesting because there is a lot of focus, particularly on what quantum compute could do. So yeah. I think there's two suggestions I would make. One is as we track the availability of quantum tech in the first place and the affordability of quantum tech, as we track that on a trajectory, we're probably still a couple of years away from it being kind of broadly available, even to people with really, really deep pockets. However, in the meantime, it's like, well, so all we're doing is hoping that can get kicked down the road by 2 years, and there are things that we can do right now. When we think about our data architecture, like in cybersecurity, we think about like a blast radius, so with segmentation, we can kind of contain a blast radius. We can apply similar kind of methods to our data architecture, so that if something is breached or stolen now, breached 2 years from now, we're essentially controlling just how much of a problem that is going to be to us or to anybody that's involved in that particular data set that's been harvested.
Awesome. Jermaine, anything you wanted to add on that?
No, I think when I think about quantum computing, it's the new kind of one of the trends, and I think a lot of organizations are trying to figure it out. And I really like what Cristina and Gavin touched upon. Nothing to really add of substantial there, but just, with anything with new tech and new technology, I think companies are always challenged to try to figure things out and figure out how they learn about the new tech and how they protect themselves from a privacy and cybersecurity perspective. So I think, organizations are essentially just learning along with the new tech and just figuring things out. But it's important for companies to invest some time and some R&D in order to do that, so it doesn't come back and bite them in the end.
Awesome. And one question here is sort of the top rank one. what are the major changes the cybersecurity sector needs to make in order to protect and keep up with bad actors from obtaining sensitive information? Anyone want to jump in on that?
I can add a point of view and then kick it over to Gavin and Cristina if they want to add some things there. So top of mind for me for this is threat intelligence sharing. So, you know, strengthening collaboration and information sharing between not only just your organization, but organizations and cybersecurity firms to help identify threats and more proactively respond to them. The other thing that comes to mind when I think about evolving threats and protecting sensitive information is adopting a zero trust architecture. So it's assuming no trust and making sure that the model can protect against threats that both originate from the outside and from within the network, limiting access to sensitive information based upon strict identity verification. Continuous monitoring response is another one. So implementing advanced monitoring systems that provide real-time, not near real-time, but real-time visibility and automated responses to suspicious activities that can help mitigate risks through escalation. And then the last one I'll mention is, and we do this, and I think Cristina mentioned it before, is regular audits and vulnerability assessments. So conducting frequent security audits and penetration testing can help identify and rectify weaknesses in your system and processes before they can be exploited. And the other tidbit I'll give there is that it's important to not only do that, but it's important to change your approach and vendors as well, so that you get a different perspective and they're not identifying the same threats or vulnerabilities. It's important that you get a different perspective, and different companies can give you that different perspective. Gavin, any thoughts there?
Yeah, just kind of supplemental to things you highlighted there, Jermaine. I thought it was interesting, the questions like, what can the cybersecurity sector do? And when we think about it, I would like to expand the question and say the reality is, what should the technology and operations organizations do? So yes, there's a cybersecurity function. You know, we can't fight machines with humans. So we know that bad actors and threat actors are using AI, then therefore our toolkit needs to include something that will run at machine clock speed. But as we think about most of the breaches that happen, and even if you look like the top controls in the last 15 years, there's only 3 or 4 of them that have ever changed. And these breaches happen because somewhere else in operations, or somewhere in the IT organization, or some human behavior has actually opened the door. And that finger then might get pointed at the CISO and say, well, she or he should have done something differently. But if probably the worst thing that would happen in those scenarios is the detection didn't pick it up quickly enough, you know? So it's really, I think it's much more broadly is not just what the cyber sector needs to do, it's what the whole technology and tech services, including IT and OT, there are substantial just hygiene related things that need to be prioritized, not deprioritized.
You know, one of the things, I'm sorry, David, I'm stepping on you. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that one of the things that's really important that pulled out an idea from my head as Gavin was articulating, not just cyber, but the technology and OT sectors need to do. I think it's the responsibility of the data privacy and cybersecurity organizations to create security champions. So one of the things that I always like to do is to develop a community of practice where we pull in individuals that security is not their job, and we educate them and we empower them to take back security best practices to their everyday operations. And we make security part of everyone's job. And it's the responsibility of the leadership there to do that and to be forthcoming with sharing ideas, sharing strategy, taking input, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, this is awesome. Gentlemen, I really appreciate all of your time. And I think, Hannah, we're getting close to time on this. So maybe I will wrap up here and hand it back over to you, and we can get back for additional questions through other means. But thank you all for your submissions. We had wonderful participation. I saw quite a peak of participation. We held through almost the entire thing. So thank you all. Thank you for the interest in this topic. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Jermaine. I learned something from everybody on the panel today. So appreciate the chance to ask you questions. And thanks again for this opportunity, Hannah. Back over to you.
Yeah, that was such a great conversation. And you're right, we did have a ton of questions we weren't able to address. So we'll be sure to follow up with some content around those. Thank you so much to our panelists for being here today and offering your insight. We have some great events coming up, so feel free to select the button on your screen and register for those. We will see you all next time. And thank you again for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Be safe.
Bye.